The grotesque reign of Ferdinand VII, Spain's most depraved monarch. When historians rank the worst monarchs in Spanish history, one name consistently tops the list. Every scholar who has studied his reign reaches the same conclusion. There has never been a more depraved, cruel, or sexually deviant king to sit on the Spanish throne. Yet the real story of Ferdinand VII remains obscured, buried beneath a carefully constructed myth of royal marriages, noble bloodlines, and the dignity of European monarchy. This myth was designed to hide a grotesque reality. Ferdinand VII didn't just rule Spain. He transformed the royal palace into a den of sexual horror that would make even the most hardened brothel madam blush. Before he earned the infamous title El Rey Felon, the Felon King, Ferdinand was a prince so physically deformed and sexually incompetent that his own mother-in-law wrote letters describing him as not even a man. This is one of the rare cases in European history where multiple eyewitness accounts, from royal physicians, foreign diplomats, and victims themselves, paint a consistent and horrifying picture of an anatomical abnormality that shaped a nation's destiny. What follows will shatter your understanding of royal power. It is simultaneously the most pathetic and terrifying story of sexual dysfunction ever recorded in the annals of monarchy. A wedding night of infamy. October 1819. Let's travel back to October 1819 to the royal palace in Madrid, where a wedding night so infamous unfolded that even the Pope was forced to intervene. A 16-year-old princess, Maria Josefa Amalia of Saxony, sat trembling in her wedding chamber. Raised in a convent, innocent to the point of believing babies came from storks, she was utterly unprepared for what awaited her. Her German attendants, too embarrassed to explain the realities of a wedding night, simply dressed her in white and left her alone, clutching a rosary. When the door opened, it wasn't the charming prince of fairy tales who entered. Instead, a 35-year-old man, overweight, gout-ridden, with thick, protruding lips and predatory eyes, stumbled into the room. But it wasn't Ferdinand VII's appearance that made Maria Josefa's blood run cold. Ferdinand suffered from a condition so extreme and grotesque that modern medical science still struggles to explain it: macrogenitosomia. In plain terms, his genitals were monstrously oversized, not in a way that inspired awe, but in a manner described by French writer Prosper Mérimée, who interviewed courtiers present that night, as thin as a sealing wax taper at the base, and as thick as a fist at the end, as long as a billiard cue. Imagine being a sheltered 16-year-old raised by nuns, confronted with such a sight. Maria Josefa took one look and fled the bed, screaming in terror. But the horror escalated. Ferdinand, drunk on wine and lust, gave chase. Picture a morbidly obese king stumbling around the bedroom, trying to catch his teenage bride, who was literally running for her life. She was fast, he was not. Enraged by this insult, Ferdinand burst out of the bedroom, completely naked, his deformity on full display, and screamed at the queen's attendants, calling them whores and brutes, and demanding they prepare her within 15 minutes. The attendants, including the queen's sister-in-law, were forced to explain to a terrified child what was about to happen. Whatever they said only worsened her fear. When Ferdinand returned to claim his marital rights, he was met with a stench no royal perfume could mask. In her absolute terror, Maria Josefa had lost control of her bowels. The king, in all his grotesque glory, found his wedding bed soiled with human waste. Recoiling in disgust, he declared that queens do not possess the fragrance of civet, and stormed out, refusing to touch his bride for over a week. This was just the beginning of Maria Josefa's nightmare. A king's monstrous anatomy. To understand why this wedding night went so catastrophically wrong, we must examine what Ferdinand VII was hiding beneath his royal robes. Multiple physicians who examined the king left detailed records. Dr. José María de la Fuente wrote that His Majesty possessed a member of such extraordinary dimensions that normal conjugal relations are rendered impossible without causing severe injury to his partner. The shape itself was an aberration of nature, thin at the base, massive at the end, like a medieval torture device. This wasn't a blessing. It was a curse that haunted Ferdinand from his first marriage at age 17. In 1802, young Prince Ferdinand married his cousin, Maria Antonia of Naples. On their wedding night, according to Maria Antonia's own letters, the prince merely gawked at his bride and awkwardly fondled her, repeatedly groping her bosom, unsure how to proceed. He literally didn't know how sex worked. For 11 months, their marriage remained unconsummated. Ferdinand would become aroused, attempt to mount his wife, and fail. His abnormal anatomy made basic human reproduction an impossible puzzle. Maria Antonia's mother, Queen Maria Carolina of Naples, wrote frantic letters. "My daughter weeps nightly. The prince feels nothing. Attempts to induce him are useless. There is no pleasure or effect. This situation is extraordinary and unfortunate for whoever is at his side." Eventually, a royal confessor, a Catholic priest, had to explain to the future king, in explicit detail, how to have sex with his wife. The humiliation spread through European courts. The Spanish heir was a sexual incompetent, a physical freak incapable of performing the most basic marital duty. When Ferdinand finally succeeded, after nearly a year of failures, the consequences were catastrophic. Maria Antonia suffered 2 miscarriages, likely from internal injuries, and died at just 21, her body broken by her husband's deformity. But once Ferdinand figured out sex, he became obsessed. The death of his first wife in 1806 freed him from the marriage bed, unleashing something monstrous. A decade of debauchery. When Ferdinand returned to power in 1814 after Napoleon's defeat, he was 30 years old, sexually frustrated, and drunk on absolute power. What followed was a decade of debauchery that would make Caligula blush. Every night the king slipped out of the palace in a dark cloak, heading to Madrid's seediest brothels. His favorite was run by a madam nicknamed Pepe la Malagueña, an establishment so notorious that decent people crossed the street to avoid it. Ferdinand didn't go alone. He assembled a crew of morally bankrupt young aristocrats, and together they turned Madrid's red light district into their personal playground. Disturbingly, Ferdinand was so proud of his deformity, the very thing that had humiliated him in youth, that he turned it into a party trick. Multiple witnesses described the same stomach-turning scene. The king, drunk on cheap wine, would challenge his companions to measurement contests, exposing himself and comparing sizes. Ferdinand always won, earning the nickname El Bien Dotado, the well-endowed one. He strutted through brothels, his monstrous anatomy on display, bragging about his conquests. But the bragging was the least disturbing part. Ferdinand had developed a perverse fetish, recorded by Count José María de Villalobos. "They leave my bed certain that no other man can give them the pleasure I gave them. And do you know what I enjoy most after possessing them? Collecting the rags stained with the proof of their maidenhood." The King of Spain collected blood-stained sheets from the virgins he deflowered, keeping them as trophies. This wasn't a medieval tradition. It was a personal, grotesque hobby, pursued with the enthusiasm other kings reserved for art collections. While the Prado Museum was being built, ironically by his neglected second wife, Ferdinand was amassing a collection of blood-stained evidence of his conquests. His victims weren't limited to prostitutes. As he traveled Spain, he left a trail of ruined women: a widow in Aranjuez, a peasant girl in Sacedon, palace servants who couldn't refuse their king. Each encounter added to his collection, each bloody rag another trophy in his chamber of horrors. A kingdom in collapse. While Ferdinand spent his nights measuring genitals and collecting virgin blood, Spain was falling apart. His country lost its entire American empire. Liberal reformers were executed by the thousands, and the economy collapsed. But the king didn't care. He had brothels to visit, women to ruin, trophies to collect. In 1816, Ferdinand needed an heir. His solution was to marry his niece, Maria Isabel of Braganza, a 19-year-old Portuguese princess. Madrid's gossips greeted her with a cruel rhyme: fea, pobre, Portuguesa, chupate esa, ugly, poor, and Portuguese, suck on that. But Maria Isabel had dignity, something her husband lacked. While Ferdinand continued his brothel raids, she founded the Prado Museum and opened the Royal Academy to women artists, bringing culture to a court drowning in depravity. To Ferdinand, she was merely a womb, a vessel for the heir he desperately needed. In 1818, Maria Isabel became pregnant, But complications arose during labor. The baby was breech, and the queen was fading. The royal physicians faced a choice: save the mother or the child. Ferdinand, without hesitation, commanded, "Save the child. Cut her if you must." In 1818, with no anesthesia beyond alcohol and opium, surgeons performed an emergency cesarean. Believing her unconscious, they sliced open her abdomen. She wasn't unconscious. Midway through, Maria Isabel's eyes shot open, and her scream echoed through the palace. Fully awake, she endured unimaginable pain as the surgeons continued. The baby was already dead, and Maria Isabel bled out on the operating table at just 21 years old. Her sister publicly blamed Ferdinand for her death, with whispers suggesting his deformed anatomy or syphilis, contracted from brothel visits, caused the stillbirth. Ferdinand felt no guilt. Within a year, he was seeking wife number 3. Maria Josefa's resistance. Maria Josefa, the 16-year-old who soiled herself on her wedding night, faced a marital horror show that didn't end with that first night. After Ferdinand refused to touch her for a week, he returned, only to be met with surprising resistance. Raised by nuns to be meek, Maria Josefa turned fierce, biting, scratching, and kicking Ferdinand in his monstrous genitals, sending him howling from the room. But her resistance couldn't last. Ferdinand, as king, saw her as his property. He tried a new approach: patience. Every night he entered her chamber while she prayed the rosary. Maria Josefa's greatest weapon was her ignorance. She genuinely believed babies came from storks. When Ferdinand tried to explain the facts of life, she accused him of lying, declaring, "God would not create such a vile method of creating life. You are testing my virtue with these lies." Weeks turned into months, and the king who bragged of conquest couldn't bed his own wife. The court whispered, and foreign ambassadors reported the scandal. The King of Spain was being sexually rejected by a teenager. In desperation, Ferdinand wrote to Pope Pius VII, begging the Holy Father to convince his wife to consummate the marriage. The Pope's response, preserved in the Vatican archives, delicately explained that marital relations were not only permitted, but required by God. Producing an heir was Maria Josefa's sacred duty. Even this wasn't enough. Maria Josefa agreed to submit, but only under strict conditions. She would pray the rosary before each encounter, keep her eyes closed, and think of the Virgin Mary to maintain her spiritual purity. Imagine Ferdinand, the absolute monarch of Spain, lying beside his teenage wife as she recited "Hail Mary, full of grace," during their attempts to consummate the marriage. It was, by all accounts, the least erotic relationship in royal history. Maria Josefa lay like a corpse, lips moving in silent prayer, while Ferdinand tried to create an heir. The king who collected virgin blood was reduced to begging for enthusiasm from his wife. For 10 years, they endured this matrimonial purgatory, 10 years of rosary-accompanied sex, 10 years without a child. When Maria Josefa died in 1829 at age 25, officially of fever, the court sighed in relief. Ferdinand had failed again. 3 wives, 2 dead, 0 legitimate heirs. The final queen and the sex cushion. At 45, diseased from decades of debauchery, Ferdinand had one last chance. His 4th wife, Maria Cristina of Bourbon II Sicilies, was his niece, 23 years old, beautiful, intelligent, and ruthlessly practical. Unlike his previous wives, she came prepared, having studied their failures. Producing an heir wasn't just politics, it was an engineering problem. Royal physician Dr. Antonio Hernandez, after examining Ferdinand's anatomy and reviewing past medical records, devised a solution: a special cushion, una almohadilla, made of silk and stuffed with down feathers, with a precisely measured 4 cm deep hole in the center. The cushion acted as a barrier, allowing only the functionally necessary part of Ferdinand to make contact, preventing the internal damage that had plagued his previous marriages. Maria Cristina presented this to Ferdinand as a medical necessity, not a limitation, and his ego accepted it. The first night using the cushion was awkward, but it worked. Within 3 months, Maria Cristina was pregnant. On October 10, 1830, Madrid's cannons fired in celebration as she gave birth to a healthy daughter, the future Isabella II. 2 years later, a second daughter, Luisa Fernanda, was born. Ferdinand finally had his heirs, thanks to 4 wives, 2 deaths, a papal intervention, and a specially designed sex cushion. A legacy of trophies and terror. The birth of Isabella created a new problem. Spanish law, the Salic law borrowed from France, forbade female succession. Ferdinand's brother, Don Carlos, expected to inherit the throne. Unwilling to let a technicality stop him, Ferdinand issued the Pragmatic Sanction of 1830, overturning centuries of law to allow his daughter to inherit. When he died in 1833, this decision sparked the First Carlist War, a bloody conflict that killed hundreds of thousands, all because a king with a monstrous deformity finally figured out how to use a cushion. But Ferdinand's darkest legacy lay in his trophies. After his death, Maria Cristina ordered a discreet inventory of his private chambers. What they found defied belief. A cedar chest containing dozens of cloth squares, each labeled with a date and name. Carmen, Pepe's house, March 1821. Isabella, palace servant, January 1823. Maria, widow of Aranjuez, September 1824. The king had been collecting these grim mementos for nearly 2 decades, each representing a woman, some willing, some not, who endured his brutality. The dates clustered around moments of political violence. After crushed uprisings, executions, or setbacks, Ferdinand added multiple trophies in quick succession. Violence in the throne room led to violence in the bedroom, as if crushing political resistance and female innocence were 2 sides of the same sick coin. One entry stood out. Anna, 15 years, daughter of Colonel Bermudez, February 1823. Colonel Bermudez, a liberal officer, had been executed after a failed revolt. His daughter came to beg for his life and left with her father dead, and her innocence destroyed, memorialized in Ferdinand's collection. This wasn't just a king abusing power for sexual gratification. It was systematic predation, using sex as a tool of political terror. The liberals he couldn't execute, he destroyed through their daughters, wives, and sisters. Maria Cristina ordered the collection burned, but not before courtiers recorded its existence, their accounts too consistent to dismiss as gossip. The surviving cloth suggests dozens of victims. The reality was likely worse. For every trophy, how many women fought him off, escaped, or were silenced? Ferdinand took those secrets to his grave. A monstrous legacy. When Ferdinand VII died on September 29, 1833, Spain barely mourned. His brother declared war, his daughter faced civil wars to defend her throne, and his widow remarried a common guard, scandalizing the nation. But Ferdinand's true legacy wasn't political, it was personal. He transformed the Spanish monarchy from a sacred institution into a sordid joke. Every king after him was tainted by association, every royal marriage viewed with suspicion. His daughter, Isabella II, inherited more than his throne. She inherited his sexual appetites. Her scandalous affairs and rumored nymphomania led to her overthrow in 1868. The Bourbon dynasty Ferdinand had engineered into existence was undone by the depravity he passed down. That silk cushion, now lost to history, symbolizes everything wrong with his reign. Power corrupted to the point of physical deformity, legitimacy so fragile it required a medical procedure. Ferdinand VII is remembered not for achievements or noble deeds, but for his grotesque anatomy and the suffering it caused. Historian Stanley G. Payne called him cowardly, selfish, grasping, suspicious, and vengeful. Emilio La Parra deemed him the worst of the Habsburg and Bourbon monarchs. The Duke of Wellington called him the most contemptible of God's creatures. They're all correct, but too kind. Ferdinand wasn't just a bad king. He was a predator with a crown, a man who turned his deformity into a weapon, collecting human suffering like others collected art. His legacy lies in the unnamed women of that burned collection, the servants who couldn't refuse, the virgins who became trophies, the wives who died or lived in terror. Ferdinand VII proved that monsters don't hide under beds or in dark forests. Sometimes they wear crowns and rule nations, sometimes they're celebrated as kings, and sometimes, just sometimes, history remembers them for exactly what they were. If this story shocked you, consider exploring The Medieval Child Bride, about a 6-year-old forced to marry a 29-year-old king, another tale of royal marriage that challenges everything you thought you knew about monarchy. The horrors of the bedroom have shaped more history than any battlefield,